Welcome dear students. Today we are going to discuss one of the important topic, that's Hobbesian state of nature. So let's first begin with the objectives. To understand how Hobbes defined the human nature, and then we will have a look to analyze Hobbes's concept of state of nature, and we will evaluate the way out that Hobbes suggested to come out of state of nature, and finally there will be a conclusion of the lecture. Let's have a look on summary. Thomas Hobbes's book Leviathan, which was published in 1651, is considered as one of the important texts of political theory, which deals with the foundational concepts of social contract. The primary steps in Hobbes's logic are well known and obvious, because in a state of nature characterized by conflict, people would opt to enter into a social compact that ultimately results in absolute government, ideally in the form of a monarchy. Hobbes's philosophy is less concerned with constitutional doctrine and more with his explanation of human nature and the logic of the social contract. In the 17th century, his preference for total absolutism was held by a minority and had long since lost its persuasiveness. Hobbes's theory is interesting because it tries to explain how human beings who are presumed to be antisocial by nature can grow and form cooperative civil societies. Therefore, in this lecture, an attempt has been made to make students understand Hobbes's concept of human nature and his concept of state of nature. Now, dear students, let's have a look on the background and influences of Hobbes's state of nature. So, as the 17th century unfolds, then there used to be Parliament insisting on curtailing the powers of the monarch. The Civil War in England breaks out in 1642, which was against the absolute monarchy, and that the king has to rule with Parliament, which is representative of the people. The king, on the other hand, who takes umbrage at Parliament trying to limit his power, is willing to let his secular power be limited by religious authorities. Parliament, interestingly, insisting on limiting the absolute power on the king, will brook no challenge from any religious body to its own absolute power as the people's representative. We clearly see here the emergence of the theory of parliamentary sovereignty. The army fought war on behalf of Parliament was led by Oliver Cromwell, an independent. Cromwell had not only the task to gain a military victory against the king's forces, but also to keep both conservative and radical lobbies among the supporters of Parliament at bay. Radicals wanted complete religious freedom and universal suffrage, while conservatives wanted to implement the Anglican Code. After all, their support for Parliament as a representative body meant that this representation was to be as wide as possible. These conflicting positions on how representative a body like Parliament was to be can be seen in the famous Putney debates, which took place in October and November 1647 between factions of Cromwell's New Model Army and members of the radical group, the Levellers. The radical position was that all soldiers and others, as long as they were not servants or beggars, ought to have a voice in electing those who would represent them in Parliament, even if they had less than 40 shillings per annum in freehold land. Cromwell and his allies wanted a much more restricted franchise, restricted to only freeholders. The more radical elements in their army followed the Levellers in proclaiming that the franchise must not be restricted on the basis of property. It should be denied only to those who were dependent on others for their livelihood. It is in this context of overlapping conflicts that we see Hobbes's writing the various versions of his political theory. England saw significant political, religious and economic upheaval at the start of the 17th century. Politically, there was the long-standing conflict between the king and Parliament. Since the 13th century, when Parliament emerged as a countervailing force to the king's power, the monarchs of England had tried to suppress it. But at the beginning of the 17th century, this struggle turned into a full-fledged civil war. In 1629, Charles I began to rule England without consulting Parliament. After 11 years of struggle, in 1640, Parliament tried to abolish the king's discretionary powers. The Civil War started in 1642 when Charles I attempted to suspend the Parliament. The parliamentary side prevailed after a few setbacks, and King Charles I was put to death in 1649. So there was no monarchy in England for the following 11 years until it was constitutionally restored in 1660. Hobbes developed his theories of political theory while keeping these things in the back of his mind and attempting to figure out how to settle this conflict. Although he didn't publish them both until 1650. Hobbes had already written two tracts by the late 1630s, that is, Human Nature or the Fundamental Elements of Policy and De Corpore Politico or the Elements of Law, Moral and Politic. Hobbes emphasized the need for total sovereignty in these writings. These manuscripts were circulated among English parliamentarians who had been fighting to curtail the sovereign's power around 1640. This caused a stir and Hobbes was forced to escape to Europe in fear of his life. Only in 1651 did he return to England after living in exile for the next 11 years. During these years of exile, he wrote in 1642 De Cive in Latin, which he published in 1651 in English as Philosophical Rudiments Concerning Government and Society. He became part of the royalist circle and started teaching mathematics to the Charles II, who was also in exile in Paris. It was during these years that Hobbes produced his third and final version of political theory, his masterpiece Leviathan, which was published in 1651. Hobbes wanted to construct a theory of politics based on scientific method. The science that attracted him most was geometry, and he saw himself as proving theorems about politics in Leviathan. Before beginning our discussion of Leviathan, let's remember that it is Hobbes or his thought that make transition from classical and medieval political thought. If virtue was the dominant idea of classical and medieval Western political philosophy, then liberty can be said to be the clarion call of modern political philosophy. Hobbes marks a sharper break from earlier political thought because he not only foregrounds liberty but makes the idea of moral goodness dependent on liberty instead of the other way around. Liberty henceforth becomes the touchstone of everything. Hobbes is the originator of the contractarian tradition of political theory, which says all relation in which human beings enter are binding only if they are entered into freely or voluntarily. This foregrounding of liberty is evident in each one of Hobbes' central concepts. In a brief introduction to his work, Hobbes reminds us that when we praise God for his wonderful creation, that's man, we must realize that God's creation, men, have created something even more wonderful, of greater stature and strength. They have made an artificial man, the commonwealth or state, for the protection and defense of these natural men. The social contract of these men to form a political community results in the creation of a new entity, which is artificial man or the state. This state is called Leviathan, or you can say sovereign, because it is so powerful and effective than individual men, and being so powerful, the state merits our attempt to understand it. Humans do not lead happy lives because of virtue or morality, but because of a strong state that is a prerequisite to fulfill human needs. Now, dear students, let's have a look on Hobbes' human nature. Hobbes stated that comprehending its matter and artificer, both of which are represented by man, is the first step towards understanding the state. Let's begin with his understanding of human nature. According to Hobbes, a human being is matter in motion. There are two types of motion: vital motions such as blood circulation or heartbeat, and voluntary motions. Hobbes classifies voluntary motions as either motions towards or away from an object and refers to them as endeavors. When this endeavor is focused on the thing causing it, it's called appetite or desire. When it's focused on something else, it's called aversion. All that exists in human beings are bundles of aversions and appetites. And living is merely gratifying these cravings one after the other. So, according to Hobbes, felicity, or you can say happiness, is the transition from one satisfied desire to the next, and the end of desire is what we refer to as death. The essence of life is the constant satisfaction of one's desires. which are attained by humans through reason. Human beings have both passion and reason, but their reason is slave of their passion, and its role is to find the most efficient means of achieving these passions. For the Greeks, happiness was the goal of life. For Hobbes too, it remains same. But that is where the similarity ends, defining happiness as the continuous satisfaction of our desires. Hobbes made desire the engine of all human actions. Human beings are no longer conceived of as struggling to find out what virtue is through their reason. Reason has now merely to follow desire. For Hobbes, what we call virtuous is simply that which we desire. Individuals desire different things, so there is no one action which can be termed virtuous. Now, dear students, let's see how Hobbes has defined the state of nature. Hobbes clarifies us with his idea of the state of nature through this understanding of human nature. The way people interact with each other when there is no political authority is reflected in the state of nature. Hobbes' understanding of human nature depicts a state of conflict. Humans are in conflict with each other because they are self-centered and do not agree on what is good or bad, because everyone has the freedom to do as they please, and there is no inherent inferiority in the state of nature, which is one of freedom and equality. The level of hostility increases because no one backs down from pursuing their goals. In actuality, there is always a constant pursuit of what he calls power after power, as people aim to ensure that nothing can prevent them from achieving their goals. Not only is it inherent in human nature to constantly seek out and satisfy new desires, but the pursuit of glory is also one of these desires that is, and I quote, part of the nature of man, end quote. Human beings cannot stand for any sign of others undervaluing them. This creates a situation of every present hostility in which there is no point in undertaking long-term projects like cultivating a farm. For instance, since there is no security that one will get to enjoy the fruits of this agricultural labor. In such conditions, there is not any place for industry because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, no commodious buildings, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and danger of violent death, and the life of man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Many contemporary political scientists have popularized Hobbes' state of nature by asking question whether it can be modeled as a prisoner's dilemma. The classic prisoner's dilemma is an important tool of rational choice theory, and it represents a situation the dynamic of which is such that the two actors have no choice but to act in ways which make both of them worse off. The structure of the situation itself prevents the actors from choosing options to their mutual benefit. Several recent commentators on Hobbes have wondered whether it is fair to present him as the original rational choice theorist. After all, in the state of nature, given freedom and equality, it is only rational to seek power after power, with the end result being a suboptimal one of constant insecurity. Now, dear students, let's have a look on the laws of nature. As we know now, since human beings have reason, Hobbes argues they can see in the state of nature that there must be a more efficient way of fulfilling their desires. Here Hobbes also introduced his third major idea, that is, the idea of the laws of nature. There are passages in Leviathan which present the law of nature as the precepts of reason. As rational rules, we show the way as to how to achieve one's desires. Hobbes lists as many as 19 laws of nature, with some of the most important ones being the following. The first law of nature commands men to seek peace and to follow it. The second law of nature states that a man be willing when others are so too as far forth as for peace and defense of himself, he shall think it necessary to lay down his rights to all things and be contented with so much liberty against other men, as he would allow other men against himself. And the third law of nature states men to perform their covenants made. The ninth law of nature that commands that every man acknowledge the other for his equal by nature. And the 17th law that states that no man be allowed to be judge in his own case. Now, if we look at the content of these laws of nature, we can see how Hobbes would argue that human reason would guide human beings, that they fulfill their desires only if they live in a state governed by law. The laws of nature, despite existing in the state of nature, are not followed for the lack of an enforcing authority. What needs to be done is to set up someone as the enforcer of these very laws. So, dear students, we have come to the conclusion. Let's sum up our lecture. To sum up this lecture, Hobbes believed that the universe was a machine composed of particles that moved in accordance with mechanical laws. This motion or movement, as he saw it, is the fundamental idea of the universe. Humanity is the microcosm and pinnacle of the vast cosmos. He is a machine too, more intricate than plants and animals, but made of moving particles just like the universe, and they are. Hobbes sought to identify the laws that govern the movement of these particles within humans and between humans. He therefore insisted that an examination of human nature be the first step in any study of political society. Therefore, he reiterates that read thyself is a piece of advice that all people, but especially statesmen, should heed. After reading his writings, they will find it easier to do so. When man is successful in achieving what he wills, he is said to enjoy felicity. This is not to be equated with pleasure as the utilitarians imagined that it was. It is rather continued success in obtaining those things which a man from time to time desired, and therefore it can give man no rest, for it is not final end, but a continued progress of the desire from one object to another, the attaining of the former being still but the way to the later. It is a man's power that assures him success in the pursuit of felicity. His lack of power, that is the cause of his failure. Thus, life is, and I quote, a perpetual and restless desire of power, after power, that ceased only in death, end quote. Since, and again I quote, man cannot assure the power and means to live well, which he hath present, without the acquisition of more, end quote. Thus, the individual is completely self-centered. For Hobbes, every single man is absolutely a solitary and lonely individual. A man and his world are one and must be distinct from the worlds of other men, since knowledge is derived from the senses and different senses cannot perceive the same world. Different people belong to no moral or political order and have completely different worlds, pleasures, truths and goods. Often regarded as the great absolutist, Hobbes is actually one of the greatest individualists in political philosophy. He is a radical, all-encompassing individualist doctrine. The individual whom he describes has the possibility of breaking down his solitude because he has the power of speech. For in making a language, men must agree that certain sounds mean certain things. Moreover, language is not only a means of communicating with others, it is the way in which we become conscious of our own thoughts. For a name is a word taken at pleasure to serve as a mark that may raise in our minds a thought like some thought we had before. Moreover, in this way, men are enabled to pass from names to definitions, to arguments and to reasons, which is nothing but reckoning, that is adding and subtracting of the consequences of general names agreed upon for the marking and signifying of our thoughts. It is this faculty of reasoning which, together with religion, distinguishes man from the beast. Reasoning, however, is artificial, while the passions are natural. Man, therefore, is not primarily a creature of reason, but is the creature of passions. Moreover, man's reasoning is fallible, as in arithmetics, unpracticed men must, and professors themselves may often err and cast up faults. So also in any other subject of reasoning, the ablest, most attentive and most practiced men may deceive themselves and infer false conclusions. And Hobbes is very well aware that if a man has the ability to reason, he has also the privilege of absurdity, to which no living creature is subject but man. And of men, Hobbes adds, those are of almost subject to it that profess philosophy. For it is most true that Cicero said of them somewhere that there can be nothing so absurd but may be found in the books of philosophers. Nevertheless, reason will help man in his pursuit of felicity, but not even its assistance will enable him to overcome the difficulties that he will find in his ways, which spring both from the circumstances in which he finds himself and from an inherent defect in his own character. Circumstances place him among his fellow men, and whose very existence makes it difficult for him to satisfy his desire. For many, it is will want what he wants, and is therefore his deadly enemy. Moreover, men always seek to surpass one another, for man whose joy consists in comparing himself with other men can relish nothing but what is imminent. This urge to excel necessitates a perpetual contention for honor, riches, and authority. Contrasting men with bees and ants, Hobbes says, men are continually in competition for honor and dignity, which these creatures are not. Consequently, amongst men, there arises on the ground envy and hatred, and finally war. Roughly speaking, the power of men are equal, the ingenuity of David always being sufficient to offset the strength of Goliath. Therefore, men will always live in a condition of perpetual fear of competition and war. This will be the more certain because of an inherent defect in man's intellect, vainglory or pride. This is a vain conceit of one's own wisdom and strength, for such is the nature of men, that however they may acknowledge many others to be more witty or more eloquent or more learned, yet they will hardly believe there be many so wise as themselves, for they see their own wit and other men's at a distance. Men are thus apt to think themselves stronger than they are, to underestimate the necessity of fighting continually for what they want, to fear less than they ought to fear the frustration of their desires and even certain death. Blinded by their brilliance, carried away by their conceit, desire will outstrip prudence in them, and death will be their reward. This then is the state of nature in which man lives. Neither right nor wrong, nor justice or injustice have place in it. Force and fraud were its cardinal virtues, and the only rule that man acknowledges is the good old rule, the simple plan that he should take who has the power, and he should keep who can. In such conditions, says Hobbes, there is no place for industry because the fruit thereof is uncertain, and consequently no culture of the earth, no navigation, nor use of the commodities that may be imported by sea, no commodious building, no instruments of moving and removing, such things as require much force, no knowledge of the face of the earth, no account of time, no arts, no letters, no society, and which is worst of all, continual fear and the danger of violent death, and the life of a man solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short. Man's vainglory or pride unfits him for success in such a condition, but the condition itself is the result of his very nature, but not of his defects. The state of nature, as Hobbes sees it, is the ill condition which man by mere nature is actually placed in. The problem for Hobbes is how to extricate him from a position which the very principle of the universe, motion, has apparently designed for him. So dear students, this was all for today. I hope you have great time. Thanks.